Hello there, and welcome to this podcast brought to you by Unga Farm Care and its partner Trouw Nutrition from the Netherlands. This is the second in a series of podcasts we will be releasing over the coming months, in which we will discuss all the most common challenges that a professional dairy farmer faces. We will talk about the calves, the heifers, as well as the transition cows and the various topics related to these groups. My name is Frans van Bohemen, and in this podcast we will have a closer look at the sense and nonsense of milk and milk replacers. This podcast is a sequel to our first podcast that talked about the basics of a good calf rearing system. The topic of milk replacers and milk programs deserves more attention, and that's what we'll do today. If you have any questions about this podcast, or if you have any suggestions you'd like to share, please take up contact with the Unga Farm Care representative closest to you or call 07192 62909. That is 0719262 909. Now, let's get started. What kind of milk products are out there and what are their differences? How can you compare them yourselves? Just like we did in the previous podcast, again, we should take the perspective of a calf when putting together our young animal feeding program. A newborn calf is vulnerable, so all a young calf wants to do is to grow as fast as possible. After all, a big calf stands a better chance to survive than a small calf. But what is growth exactly? Biologically speaking, growth is no more than the accumulation of nutrients inside the calf that it received through what it ate and drank. The most efficient way for a young calf to grow is by drinking milk, because it's very easy for a young calf to use the nutrients in milk and deposit those nutrients in tissues like muscles and organs. The digestibility of milk is much better than that of dry feed. Therefore, the focus in every milk program during the first weeks of life should be on providing a lot of high quality colostrum at first, switching to a high quality source of milk following the colostrum period. Remember that a newborn calf is essentially a monogastric animal. The rumen at that stage is still dysfunctional and needs a few weeks before it can start contributing meaningfully to the nutrition of the animal. Focusing your feeding program on dry feed before the rumen is properly developed will not work because fermentation has not yet started. Well, here it's easy to get confused. On the one hand, good quality milk is highly digestible and nutritious for a young calf, but it's also expensive. On the other hand, dry feed is cheaper, but rumen fermentation needs to get started first before the calf can make effective use of it. What program then is suitable both in terms of stimulating the growth and health of the young calf while being cost effective at the same time? Your milk program should put strong emphasis on milk feeding during the first 5 weeks of life before slowly switching to dry feeds starting from week 6, eventually to wean the calf at 63 days or 2 months of age. With this program, we drive the growth of the calf during the most critical period of its life before turning attention to developing the rumen to make sure it's capable of taking over the role of milk once we reach the age of weaning. In the previous podcast, we have already talked about the importance of colostrum. We want to feed high quality colostrum at about 10% of the calf's birth weight within 1 hour after the calf's birth. You can feed the remaining colostrum or transition milk from another couple of days following birth until the milk buyer accepts the milk of the cow that has just calved. This is usually between 3 to 5 days after the calf's birth. After these first few days, you should turn to a product that meets your rearing objectives. Again, you ask yourself that one question: what do you want to achieve with your calf rearing system? If you are clear on your rearing objectives, it will be relatively easy to determine what program you want to follow next and what products will be most effective. Now, what we have also previously discussed are the disadvantages that raw milk has compared to a good quality milk replacer. The most important objections against raw milk are that raw milk can be a carrier of diseases between adult cows and calves. Its composition is variable, and raw milk contains very low levels of vitamins and minerals that are inadequate to satisfy the fast-growing calf. A good quality milk replacer offers both high quality nutrition and provides a hygienic source of nutrition. But what exactly is a good quality milk replacer then? How can you judge the quality of a milk replacer on your own and what to look out for? That's the topic we will turn to now. Roughly speaking, milk replacers come in three main categories depending on the source of their protein. The protein in a milk replacer can come from a vegetable protein source, which is usually soy. It can come from whey protein or from skim milk powder. Naturally, both whey and skim milk are dairy proteins. The difference between these protein sources to a great extent determines the quality of the milk powder and therefore also the price of the product. The lowest quality milk replacers are based on soy protein. You can recognize the inclusion of soy in a milk replacer if there is fiber on the label of the product. As a rule of thumb, you may assume that every 0.1% of fiber that is declared on the label of a product represents just under 2% of protein from soy origin. That means that apparently a very small quantity of fiber in a product can already represent quite significant quantities of vegetable protein. Now, take for example a product that contains 24% protein and 0.4% fiber. With this rule of thumb, that means about 8% or 1/3 of the protein in this product originates from a vegetable protein source. But what is so bad about soy protein then? Well, the problem lies with its digestibility. Very young calves are unable to digest vegetable protein and only develop this ability over time. Therefore, during the first weeks of life, the calf cannot make use of part of the protein that it receives through its milk. This slows growth and may cause diarrhea. The difference between whey powder and skimmed milk powder, which are both of dairy origin, is a little bit more technical. The main difference between these sources of protein is the fact that whey protein does not contain casein, whereas skimmed milk powder does contain casein. The presence of casein in skimmed milk powder makes the product even more highly digestible for calves and gives added intestinal safety. Regardless though, both whey and skimmed milk powder are highly digestible and a very suitable raw material for milk replacers. Unga offers two milk replacers. The Bora milk replacer is an economic way of raising solid calves. The Bora milk replacer gives predictable results without spending the world. Spray Blue is a premium whey-based milk replacer for fast growth of the calves with excellent results. Spray Blue is most suitable in well-managed systems that aim for high performance of the calves. Besides the quality of the milk replacer you choose, you need to decide how much you will feed. Especially small calves will not drink a lot of milk immediately. You can therefore slowly build up the amount of milk you feed during the first 2 weeks of life. We recommend feeding 3 times per day during the first week of life, 2 liters at every feeding. Then, during the second week, we recommend feeding twice per day, 3 liters per feeding. During week 3, 4, and 5, we feed the most milk, in total 7 liters per day divided over 2 feedings. This is also the period in which the calves are developing the bases of their organs, a very critical period that will determine the future of this animal. But more on that later. So, until 5 weeks of age, we recommend feeding 7 liters of milk per calf per day, regardless of breed. Between weeks 6 and 9, we gradually reduce the amount of milk we feed. In week 6, we feed 6 liters per day, then weeks 7 and 8, 4 liters, and in week 9, we feed 2 liters of milk. At the end of week 9, the calf will be 63 days old and ready to be weaned. This feeding scheme can also be obtained from your UNGA representative. Reducing the amount of milk you give the calves between weeks 6 and 9 is important to stimulate rumen development. If you have introduced water in week 1 and a good quality calf starter and straw in week 2, like discussed in the previous podcast, then this is the period where the calves will start consuming more serious quantities of dry feed. Because you feed less milk, the well-developed calves will go hungry and will respond by consuming more water, calf starter and straw. This again stimulates the development of the rumen, which is the first step towards successful weaning. In most cases, if calves go through a slump immediately after weaning, they probably hadn't developed their rumens sufficiently yet. A good way to check whether a calf is sufficiently prepared for weaning is the amount of Fugo calf starter the calf consumes. When a calf eats at least 1.5 kg of Fugo calf starter per day, she's ready for weaning. If she cannot manage to eat this much, keep her on milk for a little longer until she does eat those 1.5 kg. It shows her rumen is ready to take over the role of milk as the main source of nutrition. Now, we need to make a small step back. Why do we put so much emphasis on feeding a lot of high quality milk during those first 5 weeks? Well, the reason is within the calf. Young calves don't only grow in size. It's true that bigger calves have a better chance to survive from an evolutionary point of view. But that's only half the story. During the first 5 weeks of life, the organs of the calf grow faster than the rest of the calf. This is called allometric growth. The organs grow disproportionately faster than the rest of the body because strong organs are the calf's best chance to survive. Not just today, but in the longer run too. After all, these organs will stay with the animal until old age. Thus, it is both size as well as organ quality that determine a calf's success. Those organs include the liver, the lungs, and the heart, but also the mammary gland, for example, and muscle tissues. It is very important to remember that allometric growth only happens during the very first weeks of life and stops after about 50 days. The possibility to positively stimulate organ development comes only during this period of life. Missing it means losing it. Now that we have talked about the quality of a powder, most visible by the amount of fiber in the product, the other aspect of the milk program is the quantities you feed at each step in the milk period. Finally, we should talk about how much powder you put into the water. In other words, the milk's concentration. I see a lot of people trying to minimize the amount of powder they put into water. It seems the thought of many is that once the liquid turns white, it should be good enough. Well, this is a mistake. Calves don't grow from water. Calves grow from the proteins, the fats, lactose, and other nutrients in the milk powder. Basically, the more powder you manage to dissolve into the milk, the more nutrients a calf will ingest. The faster you can expect the calf to grow. Well, that's the basics. Thus, if you put very little powder in the water, the calves will grow slowly, or they may not grow at all. As a standard, you should add 1 kilogram of powder into every 7 liters of water. This yields milk with a concentration of about 12.5% dry matter in the milk. This is approximately the same concentration as raw milk. To achieve this mixture consistently, you should thus make a calculation every time you feed the calves to determine exactly how much milk you need for this round of feeding and how much powder you will need to prepare this quantity of milk. Yes, you will have understood. Feeding milk is a job to be done accurately. So, now we have talked about all aspects of milk, milk powders, and good quality milk feeding programs. Let's summarize the main points. Raw milk is not recommended for farms that are serious about their calf rearing. Milk powders, though, come in many shapes and sizes, mostly dependent on the sources of the protein in the product. You can check how much vegetable protein a milk powder contains based on the fiber level on the label. In Kenya, Unga offers producers both the Afyabora milk replacer and Sprayfo Blue. You should feed the milk generously, focusing especially on the first 5 weeks of life. Then, from week 6 to 9, you gradually reduce the amount of milk you feed until weaning at 63 days. And lastly, make sure you mix the milk as consistently as possible, adding 1 kilogram of powder to every 7 liters of water. This gives you milk of about 12.5% concentration, which is similar to cow's milk. These cornerstones give you a feeding program that prioritizes the growth of the calf while being economic to the farm's finances. Or more accurately, proper organ development for strong and productive dairy cows in the future at an affordable rate. And that was it for today's podcast, brought to you by Unga Farm Care and its partner Trouw Nutrition from the Netherlands. Would you like to learn more about milk, milk products, and feeding methods or programs that are tailored specifically to your farm situation? Please reach out to the Unga representative closest to you. I encourage you to also do so if you have any questions or suggestions otherwise. Stay tuned for new podcasts being released soon.